Good morning and welcome to Rising. I'm Amber Duke, joined by Lindsay Granger. Our first time hosting together.
We were like, how did we miss each other for like months? But I'm so excited because I've been watching a lot of your stuff, so I feel like we're going to have a great conversation.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it as well. First news of the day, 6 Secret Service agents are suspended without pay over failures related to last year's assassination attempt against President Trump. The agents will be off the job ranging from 10 to 42 days, according to Secret Service Deputy Director Matt Quinn. They will be allowed to return to the job once the period is over, but with diminished operational responsibility.
A source tells News Nation 2 of them are appealing the suspension. The leave has not begun, but is expected to start shortly. The Secret Service has faced heavy criticism for the agency's response to the attack. The gunshots in the attempt grazed Trump's ear, if you remember, and killed firefighter Corey Comparatori.
Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna sounded off on the news, saying, given the shocking security failures that day, this is the absolute bare minimum. She adds, suspending 6 Secret Service agents for 10 to 42 days without pay is nothing more than a glorified vacation. Our president was nearly assassinated.
I actually agree. I think it was a core failure. When you look at just the accountability, not just the apologies. I know that the FBI director resigned last summer, because she said this was like a gross miscalculation on their part. And so usually the head of the company takes the fall for something like this. But when you think about the other people involved with like missing meetings, I read that they only had 2 official meetings before this huge event. Knowing what the stakes were and how high the tensions were, I was calling last year to bring the temperature down. There was so much around the moment of the presidency and the election that it's like not a lackadaisical job. And it's not like 30 days off, 60 days off is going to change what happened. I think people still want to know what happened, but I don't know that people, or at least the president, shouldn't want to think that these people who have acted in that manner and went through the rigorous training it takes to be in that job have just kind of like put their hands up and are back to work in a couple months.
That's right, and it actually took the second assassination attempt at Trump's club down in Florida for the Secret Service Director Kim Cheadle to resign, and she ended up being replaced by the deputy director who was on the job when these 2 incidents occurred, so probably little comfort to people who are worried about Secret Service leadership. And realistically, the people who were involved in the security failures should be fired. I mean, the fact that they're able to remain on the job and have such a short suspension, and the fact that it hasn't been served yet, right? Like, why didn't this happen immediately after this massive failure? There were so many things that went wrong that day, from not flying their own drone over the area, right, to failing to secure that water tower overlooking the roof that the shooter was on, to having agents forgetting their key cards as they were leaving some of the buildings where snipers were located. Not getting up on the roof because it was too sloped, even though they were on a similarly sloped roof elsewhere on the property. There were just so many things that went wrong, and I actually think if you had just plugged one of those holes, this wouldn't have happened.
Right, and I think there was also a huge misstep with local law enforcement, because you saw that there was hardly any communication, that they're trying to retroactively find better ways to communicate. But when I looked at the history of assassination attempts, I mean, it's happened to almost anyone that's been in a high profile position running for president and actually made it there or very close to there, like most recently before Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Biden. But they didn't come anywhere near affecting them. The fact that we saw blood on the next president's ear and saw him, in that state was like, that was way too close for anyone's comfort. And this is one of those mistakes where, in our industry, if you put a wrong spelling or something, that's a error that needs to be corrected. But I think it's different than if a bullet grazes the next president's ear. And so I don't think that's something where you can just like slap someone on the wrist and say, do better. It's like, you expect these people to protect you at the highest level. I mean, the sole job of the Secret Service is to protect people in office, particularly the president and former presidents. And so to me, I don't understand this. I don't understand how Trump, who's very vocal and adamant and visible in many facets, wouldn't take the steps to make sure that he makes sure who's in the Secret Service are the people protecting him, how he doesn't feel more attached to this issue. It feels like he's very quiet.
It's weird, right? I felt the same way about Trump's response. The Daily Caller's White House correspondent on a trip to Iowa last weekend asked the president if he was satisfied with the investigation into the assassination attempt, and he said that he was. But meanwhile, the public doesn't know much of anything about the attempted assassin. They don't know what his motivations were, what his background was, how he got to this point. We haven't heard much about what the Secret Service is doing to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. So to hear Trump himself say it's basically case closed as far as I'm concerned is really bizarre.
And I think people, a lot of people in the MAGA base probably voted for Trump because they thought, okay, he's different from the establishment, bureaucracy, the status quo that doesn't give full answers. And so on something that's this close to home for him, I think people are really looking for real solid and thorough explanations, pointed fingers. And so whether that's the right solution forward to protect him in the future, it should just be hiring the best of the best. But people want answers. I think that's part of what he promised his base. And so it's, like you said, mind-boggling to me that people who are supporting him just want more answers, and he's kind of like, leave it alone. It's almost like, and I don't want to compare it to it, but it's almost like the Epstein case where they're looking for more information, and he's like, leave it alone. And people are like, what do you mean? This is why we bonded, because we're going to get every answer that other presidents wouldn't give to us.
Yeah, it is like that, and I know we're going to talk about that later in the show, but you repeatedly hear from the White House that this is the most transparent administration in American history. Caroline Leavitt has said that from the briefing room podium. You've had Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, say it. You recently had EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin say it. You've had Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy say it. And so you can say it a lot of times, but ultimately those words need to be backed up by actions. And I think on some things they have been transparent. We've seen HHS release a lot of new data recently, particularly relating to gender-affirming care for children. We've seen the Transportation Secretary releasing information on long-haul trucking, and like that's all great, but the juicy stuff is the assassination attempts and the Epstein files. And if you fail to hold your promises on that, the base is going to get riled up.
And I also have a theory that it's similar, reminding me of how President Trump handled Pete Hegseth, how he handled the Signal chat, how he handled creating a possible friction with somebody that was a loyalist. And so perhaps, I know when you pick your Secret Service, it's a very personal experience to make sure that everyone around you knows almost everything about you and is protecting you in those ways. And so maybe it's just something where he felt that he picked the most trustworthy people, and bringing in a whole new cohort has to go through several vetting processes, and also creates access for an entire new, let's say 5 or 6 people to be around him and potentially be the same people that write tell-alls. You know how many people wrote tell-alls when Trump left the last presidency. And so I think that is something that he wants to make sure to mitigate this term, as opposed to his first term, is the amount of enemies and friction that he creates during his term, so that afterwards it doesn't mess up the longevity of the Republican Party's power.
Well, it's true that he has indicated in the past that he really trusts the people that he has staffing the Secret Service cohort that surrounds him. And, I mean, he also might be thinking that some of these people literally threw their bodies on top of me. Maybe I don't want that type of person who's willing to throw themselves in the line of fire to leave. And maybe he's viewing the problem as more of a systemic leadership problem, and feels like, all right, well, Kim Cheadle's gone. You know, the new Secret Service director has been grilled in front of Congress. Maybe they've made reforms that make me happy. And so the sort of individual players who were on the ground that day were not necessarily to blame for the security failures. Maybe it was the people who were higher up in the administration. I mean, I'm just trying to get inside his brain. I don't know for sure, but he has talked about how his Secret Service team he really likes and really trusts them.
Right. And I think all in all, like, that moment of watching his fist go up, and it was a very powerful moment for him. So I think he's probably grateful that nothing more happened, but also knows that that moment really did, outside of the Biden terrible debate, you know, it changed the entire, I think, trajectory of the election, because people started to have empathy and understand, like, listen, this is way too far. The temperature is way too high. And I think that is something that he probably was like, listen, people really someone actually did die. So he's like, people really put their lives on the line, tried their best, and, you know, is trying to make sense of it. I just can't imagine almost losing my life and being like, no worries. You know, that's
it's crazy.
Well, we're going to talk about this a lot more, but you won't believe what Elon Musk is claiming now. Oh gosh, we'll fill you in next.
Steve Bannon and Elon Musk war of words is intensifying. The ex-Trump advisor is demanding that all Epstein files be released. Take a look.
They have to go to the court and demand and unseal the sealed evidence in Epstein. It starts there. Then bundle everything together you got, sealed and unsealed, and release it all. Or which I've called for yesterday, he should appoint a special prosecutor, special counsel now for the 2020 election and everything after that. If DOJ can't move off the dime and the FBI can't move off the dime, there should be a special counsel to go through everything and release it all.
So Bannon's insistence follows Elon Musk's claim that the War Room host is on the convicted pedophile's infamous client list. Musk took to X Tuesday, posting, quote, "Bannon is in the Epstein files." A MAGA meltdown ensued after Trump's Department of Justice and FBI released a memo Monday declaring the Epstein files don't exist. The memo is a direct contrast with AG Pam Bondi's previous claims that files contain tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with, quote, children and porn.
In reaction to the feud, Cat Turd and right-wing X account posted, quote, "I'm going to say it one more time. Elon Musk said that Steve Bannon and Donald Trump are on the Epstein list. That means Elon Musk has seen the official Epstein list. He says he knows, so why won't Elon tell us who's on the Epstein list? Elon could clear this up right now. What is he waiting for?"
Angry staffer X account posted, quote, "The most important thing about Bannon and Elon fighting is that the Trump administration is covering up the Epstein files."
This is interesting. I mean, obviously, this has sparked a lot of backlash from the Trump base. He did promise to release the Epstein files. All we got was that phase 1 binder where the influencers were holding it up and looking all excited, and it turned out there was no new information in it, and they got, right? But where's phase 2? Is there even a phase 2? Pam Bondi saying in that Fox News interview months ago that she had the client list on her desk and was in the process of reviewing it. The Daily Caller reported yesterday that, according to senior administration officials, that Bondi did have a tranche of Epstein-related files on her desk, but she hadn't looked at it yet. So she had no idea whether or not there was a client list in there. So why the heck did she say it? And then there's a lot of consternation within the administration as well, with several senior admin officials saying that the entire thing was bungled, that the DOJ absolutely overpromised how much direct evidence they had against clients of Jeffrey Epstein's human trafficking ring, which has led now to this massive disappointment and claims of a cover-up, which I'm sort of undecided on whether it's a cover-up or overpromising, but either way, this is a massive failure.
Well, I think it goes against everything that's the anti-establishment conversation that we were talking about a little earlier. I also think it sheds light on the fact that the MAGA movement is not a monolithic movement, and there are people and layers in there of people who disagree and actually are less afraid now, which I think is a good thing, to call out the president and his team, where it was like, okay, fall in line with almost anything in the past. This is like bigger than the big beautiful bill. This is bigger than, you know, the fiscal conservatives who were in line with some of the things that Trump says. But I think overall it's that the fact that he, as President Trump, governs a bit different than he campaigns. The way that he campaigned was very adamant about, this wasn't going to change any stance. He was going to find out, get to the bottom of things. And he kind of is just sitting there and allowing things to go as they go, which is bureaucratic, which is everything that is establishment. And so I think naturally people within his movement are probably over the last year let down by a number of things based on delivery versus what the Republican Party usually stands for, and the things like cutting down budgets and bringing some things down, the big beautiful bill, cutting Medicaid for a lot of people that he said he wouldn't cut Medicaid for. I think there's a layer of things that people are upset about. But for some reason, this faction of the MAGA movement is very upset, most particularly about these Epstein files, because I think it ties into the bigger conversation of deliver on all the things you promised, which is just anti-everything that we've experienced in the past.
Yeah, I think the big thing that you're identifying is the anti-establishment bit of it, which is that releasing the Epstein files is basically a middle finger to the intelligence community and all of the people who, over the past 20 years, really did turn a blind eye to a lot of what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. We saw the plea deal down in Florida, right, with Trump's former labor secretary, Alex Acosta. No one seems to be investigating the fact that Acosta has since said that he was told by higher-ups to essentially drop the case because Epstein was an intelligence asset. So why aren't we looking at the angle of him possibly feeding information to these intelligence agencies, and that's why maybe they weren't as willing to go hard after him for the child sex trafficking? I think that's a very distinct possibility, and one that when Pam Bondi was asked about it, said she had never heard of that before. She had no idea about it. And so that's apparently the level of seriousness that we're dealing with. And I think if there is a scapegoat, someone who is going to be scalped over this, it would be Bondi.
Yeah, I thought about that. I'm like, she is the fall woman. There's already, I noticed even when I said that earlier, that the base of MAGA is kind of ready to come at Trump and say what their dislikes are. They still might say it lightly, but the direct response that I'm seeing all over X is at Pam Bondi, and written pieces at Pam Bondi. I think people are just upset that they think there's someone like blocking, like he's not making the decision. But, you know, I ultimately, it can't be two things. Like if Trump is very vocal and adamant about what he wants to get done and unprecedented in so many ways, then he's picking and choosing which topics he wants to be on the forefront of and die on the sword for. And for some reason, people are probably aligning the fact that he is of this elite class, the same class, not accused obviously of the same things, but of the same class as Jeffrey Epstein, which is billionaire status. And people want to know that those people aren't protected in any different ways than the average American. And so by keeping these documents closed and inaccessible to the American public, this is just yet another wealthy person that did something wrong that is protected by our system that's supposed to protect, most importantly, children, but everyday Americans.
Right, and I think there's several possibilities of what's happening here. One is that what they're telling us is true, right? That there really wasn't that much there, or at least not evidence to tie directly what Epstein was doing to the clients, which seems unlikely to me. They have all of these videotapes, apparently, from the island, from his various homes, of the child sex abuse material, and they at least have some semblance of who he was in regular contact with, right? Even if it's not a written out literal client list. The second possibility is that he was an intelligence asset, and so they don't want to implicate the entire IC because that would obviously be a huge reckoning in American culture for us to know that they were turning a blind eye on these horrific crimes because he was feeding intelligence to the federal government. Or three, there are so many high-profile people in there, maybe even people who are members of the Trump administration that were clients of Epstein, that they have a personal interest in covering that up. And none of those possibilities, obviously, are satisfying for people who just want the full documentation and to be able to look at it for themselves, like we got to do with the JFK files, like we got to do with the RFK files.
I think especially in your number 2 point, that people are trying to figure out who is attached that might be in the government. That is the cornerstone of what President Trump campaigned on when I said about delivering through in governing how you're campaigning. And so that would be something that would be a pillar of uncovering. And also, you know, I think the American public that's voting has expressed both on the Democratic and Republican side that they are exhausted by same old, same old. We saw what just happened with Cuomo in New York. And so that is what people are screaming for. So I think breaking up these agencies and saying, pointing out the wrongdoers or the protectors who are going by status quo for wealthy people or any special interest is something that we need a reckoning for. So if it is the second one, I think that is a fair reason for everyone to be extremely upset, as well as the other reasons you named.
Yeah, and Trump himself said, why are we still talking about the Epstein files? Because you promised it, sir. All right, a federal judge blocking Trump's order to end birthright citizenship. We'll get into that next on Rising. Federal judge blocking Trump's order to end birthright citizenship. This after the Supreme Court's recent ruling restricting lower courts from having the power to do that. The New Hampshire federal judge granting class action lawsuit for children threatened by the order. The Trump administration has 7 days to appeal. Cody Wolfsey, an attorney representing the plaintiffs, had this to say after the ruling.
This is going to protect every single child around the country from this lawless, unconstitutional, and cruel executive order.
The White House responding, White House spokesperson Harrison Fields releasing a statement saying the ruling is, quote, an obvious and unlawful attempt to circumvent the Supreme Court's clear order against universal relief. And the Trump administration will be fighting vigorously against the attempts of these rogue district court judges to impede the policies President Trump was elected to implement.
Yeah, so the latest in the birthright citizenship case, again, not a ruling on the merits of birthright citizenship. That will almost certainly come from the Supreme Court. But what is interesting about this is, of course, the Supreme Court did rule on the validity of nationwide injunctions. And they effectively said that in order to have a protected class of people, you have to do a class action lawsuit in order to have an injunction that spans beyond the direct plaintiffs in the case. So that's what the ACLU did here. They found a class of people that they said would be disparately impacted by the ending of birthright citizenship and took it to a federal judge who then issued the stay. I think there's a couple of things that the left should be concerned about with this ruling. One is that it's going to get appealed by the Trump administration, which could end up back at the Supreme Court again, who might put even further restrictions on class action lawsuits. The second thing is that I think the category of people that they're referring to here is pretty overly broad. So it includes not only children of illegal immigrants, but also unborn children. So there's a hypothetical class of people in this class action lawsuit, many of whom don't meet the procedural claim for a class action lawsuit of having common cause, because some of those unborn children will have parents that are removed from the country before this case gets decided. Some of them might not make it to full term. Some of them have parents who might get legal status in their interim. So I think by making this overly broad class of people, they've kind of put themselves in a legally tricky situation.
Yeah, I think it's overall the bigger issue is that it's unfortunate that the 14th Amendment is being sifted through in this way. It's like 150 years of precedent that we're kind of trying to nitpick through right now. And I think that we have to remember, like you said, the children that are unborn or just born here really didn't make these choices that their parents made, who may have come over here not through the right means or channels, but we say any American citizen born here is American. You know what I mean? Any citizen born here is American. I think that differentiating between those words is kind of like creating a permanent underclass, because now these people are going to be here, grow into adults that didn't make any choices of their own, and then be displaced permanently. And we don't have any solution to try to find a means to get them status here that would make them comfortable, especially with the slew of other immigration policies coming down the pike from the Trump administration. So I think we have to remember our goal is to get people integrated into society and working properly, contributing to our tax system, contributing to our country, but we're creating a situation where even people who didn't make a choice to come here are permanently held to some different standard, even though they're just trying to be contributing Americans once they are here by no choice of their own.
I think one of the things that the Supreme Court will look at is what the context of the 14th Amendment was at the time, which of course was intended to give the children of slaves citizenship in the United States. And what Senator Lyman Trumbull of Illinois said at the time, who was one of the principal figures in drafting the 14th Amendment, he said that the definition of subject to the jurisdiction thereof meant not owing allegiance to anyone else. And Senator Jacob Howard of Michigan, who was a sponsor of the clause, further clarified that the amendment explicitly excludes from citizenship persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens, or who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers. So that's going to be important context, I think, as the Supreme Court is looking at this Trump executive order.
For sure. We're going to be talking about this a lot more. So up next, the Trump administration is moving to end tuition for undocumented immigrants. Stay with us.
President Trump's education department is moving to bar illegal immigrants from using taxpayer funds for tuition.
During the Clinton era, that administration enacted a rule that allowed for non-citizens to tap into some welfare benefits. The current education department is now reversing that rule, as the Daily Caller first reported.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon commented on the move, saying, quote, "Under President Trump's leadership, hardworking American taxpayers will no longer foot the bill for illegal aliens to participate in our career, technical, or adult education programs or activities."
The Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act limits public benefits to American citizens and permanent residents only, but the Clinton administration has exempted career and technical programs from this rule.
The Departments of Agriculture, Labor, Justice, and HHS also enacted similar rules under the same law. The Trump administration had filed lawsuits against states like Minnesota and Texas over in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. Texas decided to comply and scrap any such benefits.
Organizations like the ACLU are joining the legal fight against these measures. One of the authors of the Texas DREAM Act, which allows undocumented immigrants to obtain reduced in-state tuition, told CBS in a statement earlier this month, quote, "It's been the law of the land, and attempts to repeal it over the years have all failed. It's just really cruel, manipulative, and mean-spirited what is being done by the Attorney General and the DOJ."
Go ahead.
Well, I think the goal is for migrants to come to this country. And this is after having, I live in Denver, Colorado, just for context. So we had the most migrants per capita at one point coming from Texas. And so I sat down with a lot of migrants and had conversations with them about, what are your goals here? What did you think by skipping all of these measures that are, quote unquote, the right way to come, but still making it to America and fighting your way into working? And they were just like, listen, I wouldn't have done this unless it was dire circumstances. For example, one guy that I talked to from Venezuela was literally like, it was life or death for me. Like, I left my wife and son behind so I can bring back scraps to get them out of there. We just had to leave. And also, I would love to work. I would love an extension of some type of formal paperwork so that I can work temporarily and contribute. I would love to pay taxes. And so even our mayor was talking a lot about that, how a lot of people that he's sat with have said the same things. There are few and far between that come here, and actually statistics show that are criminals or are doing things that are really terrorizing our environment. And there are people that are coming here just actually trying to make a way for their family. But I think beyond that, by repealing any access to become a productive citizen, is a really good game plan for the Trump administration right now, because obviously that plays well for the base and will get them the votes in the midterms. But long-term strategy, it's not really a good one. It's short-sighted, because when we think about creating a space where it's less accessible for migrants to get things like vaccinations and access to some health things that we don't want to give them access to, well, we're going to create more of an epidemic in our own society, where there's people who still live here, because there's no way we're getting every undocumented immigrant out, that could be spreading diseases because we're not vaccinating them, because they're not, quote unquote, have the appropriate status. And so we have to think about the whole realistic goal and what's accomplishable, and I think be a little more strategic with how we, yes, of course, reform immigration, but also make sure that the people are here can get at least access to some care that will protect most Americans.
I think most Americans are really just tired of people jumping the line. There's a lot of legal immigrants, and by the way, Hispanic voters shifting to the Republican Party more than ever, not even just in the last election, but since then they've actually moved further to the right, because they are frustrated with the fact that there is a group of people who not only jump the line to get access to this country and its public benefits, but are taking jobs, taking housing. We have seen massive housing shortages and housing prices increase in this country due to the influx of 20 million illegal immigrants. We've seen them taking massive amounts of public benefits, usually on the state level, but also federal too, through some loopholes, like this interpretation of the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act by the Clinton administration. And I think nobody is of the position that there aren't some people who come here who have a vested interest in themselves and their family of being in the United States. But the problem is that we do have an asylum process, a legal process. If they are in a life or death situation, they are allowed to claim asylum. But what they're not allowed to do is cross over the border illegally and then claim that they get to stay because of some made-up rule that they deserve to be here. If you think that you deserve to be here, then you need to go through the proper process and allow that legal process to play out. And I think Americans feel very disrespected that people are taking advantage of loose border security in order to take benefits, jobs, housing that should be reserved for American citizens who pay into the system and, frankly, whose government was established on protecting their interest over that of illegal aliens.
And I think it's like a hard juxtaposition between that argument that usually comes from people that are in the Republican Party or have the wealth to employ, like Trump himself, undocumented migrants. Like, I don't know that the jobs being taken are actually the jobs that most Americans were going for. And so there's like a friction between like getting somebody the education so that they can mean well in our society and contribute. Like, this all helps us build our economy. We need laborers, right? We need workers. A lot of the jobs that these companies that have pushed back recently on President Trump saying, hey, if you cut all this, these migrants that are undocumented out of our work system, we crumble, right? Because we can't find the Americans to fill some of these roles. So I think there's like a misconception on how many Americans are being replaced by migrants that come into work here and how many people are opening up their doors to migrants, because from everything from agriculture on to real big business are using undocumented migrants in several ways. And I think that that's an important thing to understand as we're giving people the training in things like agriculture, and also just making sure that they're having some type of health and vaccination, like the bare minimum, to make sure they're not coming to work also in some of those jobs that Americans are not taking, and then getting the Americans that do work there sick. I mean, it's just a strategic thing as opposed to a very pointed thing. I think some of this is a little bit of grandstanding, because this has been a winning issue for President Trump, because it was a failing issue, which I'm the first to admit, for President Biden, right? The ball was dropped. But I think that the overcorrection has even gone too far for people within his party, because he's gotten a lot of pushback about how far he's going with some of these policies and making actual way for people to come in here. On top of that, he did create or recently created a more complicated process for just certain countries to have trouble getting to the U.S., right? So we're not talking about the white South African farmers. He made it super easy for them. But then everybody coming from Venezuela, he's making it a little bit harder. And I think that also people have uncomfortable positions about that, because what is the difference? There's not an actual genocide going on in South Africa. There are people dying on farms the same way there's people dying in Chicago over violence. And that was the root issue of it. But there's people who are dying in Venezuela because of corruption, because they're getting killed by gangs trying to just leave their country, who I've spoken to that are like the same, how can you pick and choose who can come just because you're president? It's like, we want to create a space where asylum is a real process that's not picked and chosen by who President Trump likes.
Yeah, a lot to respond to there. I'll start with the apparent backlash against him going too far on immigration. Immigration is still actually his best polled issue. According to a recent YouGov poll that came out this week, it's basically split 50-50 among the American people of those who approve or disapprove of his handling of immigration. It's actually far above his handling of the economy. On the point about jobs Americans won't do, it's not a question of an American won't do the job. It's that they won't do a job at a slave labor wage. So if you get rid of illegal immigrants, you allow wages to rise naturally for American citizens so that they can be employed in meaningful work that actually pays them what that labor is worth. I think it's really immoral, actually, to have an underclass of people in this country who are getting paid less than the work actually calls for because they have come into the country illegally. Now, the answer to that is not to give them all work permits, because that, of course, prices out even further American labor, but the answer is to allow Americans to take those jobs and force companies to raise wages and provide benefits so that Americans will take them. And I think Trump should absolutely prosecute every single business owner that is employing undocumented immigrants. To me, that's unacceptable.
He'd have to prosecute himself.
Fine. He doesn't run his business
anymore,
obviously.
but like, how we retroactively, should we bring up an old lawsuit? That's literally like most business people are in this country.
Good. They should all be fined.
Well,
what they're doing
I appreciate an equal opportunity stance on that. If
Absolutely.
you feel like President Trump himself, I'm down with that.
Yeah, if he did it, fine him. I don't care. Up next, some Zohran Mamdani allies are looking into primarying Hakeem Jeffries and other Democrats. There appears to be a feud brewing between multiple factions of the Democratic Party. Some members of the Democratic Socialists of America are threatening to primary Congressman and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and 4 others.
Gustavo Gordillo, co-chair of DSA's New York City chapter, told CNN, quote, "Jeffries' leadership has left a vacuum that organizations like DSA are filling. I think that it's more important right now. To me, it often seems like he is the one picking the fight with the left, and I think he should focus on fighting the right."
Jeffries' team fired some shots back, one of his senior advisors, Andre Richardson, telling CNN, "Leader Hakeem Jeffries is focused on taking back the House from the MAGA extremists who just ripped healthcare away from millions of Americans. However, if Team Gentrification wants a primary fight, our response will be forceful and unrelenting. We will teach them and all of their incumbents a painful lesson on June 23, 2026.
Another Democratic Congressman, Richie Torres, defended Jeffries and told the New York Post, quote, "If you side against Jeffries, you're doing the bidding of Donald Trump. You're siding against the black political establishment in the U.S."
Then there's Senator John Fetterman, who gave a pretty blunt assessment of Mamdani during an interview Thursday with Fox News. Let's watch.
Everything that I've read on him, I don't really agree with virtually any of it politically. So that's just where I'm at as a Democrat. He's not even a Democrat, honestly.
Leave it to Fetterman to ruffle the feathers. Like, if they're already ruffling,
I love it. I got to say, I love that guy. He's just so honest. But he's one of the few Democrats who has openly called out Mamdani. Now with this new Jeffries feud. But there's been others like Chuck Schumer who have, tacitly endorsed him on his social media after he won the primary. Kirsten Gillibrand apologizing for going after him for his comments about globalizing the intifada. So it's kind of curious to me that there hasn't been actually more infighting about this until now, because he is a huge departure, of course, from the Democratic establishment.
I think what the election told us last year was that the Democrats needed to completely rebrand, refocus, and reshuffle. And Mamdani, to me, is an exact reflection of that yearning in the party. And even if he's not the answer or the solution, he is just something so much different that is jarring, which I think is a good thing primarying members that have been in Congress for years and also putting their feet to the fire is important, because the longer that you serve in these roles, the more comfortable you get, right? Your constituents see your name, it's an easy vote, as well as the relationships that you have throughout Washington that make you kind of tied to more special interests than somebody coming in new with new ideas. We see that every time we have a resurrection of a brand new candidate that has a new idea. And even though Mamdani might come from a place of I can do everything because he hasn't been beaten up by the political machine yet, which happens to most people, I think it's important, even if you don't like his ideas, to embrace that there are people in the party that are feeling that way. In the same way that Trump embraced that there are people in this MAGA movement that we weren't calling that, that felt that way. He spoke to them, and then the rest of the Republicans found ways within that movement that they can align with or attach to. So there needs to be a real conversation about the people that are more like Mamdani and the people that are more traditional Democrats and what the actual strategy is. Because the more people that we have on Rising and the more I see people out and about talking about the plan for the midterms for Democrats, it's like we have to sit down, listen to the people and strategize. It's like, okay, you should have done that last year. I don't understand why that's still the message right now when there's been nothing but 4 years of complaints about all that Trump did wrong, comparing him to the worst dictators of all time. It's like, well, he's here now, and the strategy is to get ready in the moment that he's running, and respond to everything, be reactive. So I think that Mamdani is a good step and should be the first step of many new young people coming out to try to recapture that youth vote and the people of color.
Yeah, I think the age and the charisma are both benefits that Mamdani has a lot. I think the one problem that the Democratic Party should be concerned about is, one, he becomes mayor of New York City and he can't accomplish a lot of these policies because the assembly won't go along with him, right? In order to raise taxes on the white wealthy people, as he said he wants to do, he needs assemblymen to go along with that plan. He can't unilaterally do that. So maybe he gets in, he doesn't really accomplish much of his agenda, and the Democratic establishment can say, look, see, progressivism was a failure because real progressivism was really tried. Or the second possibility is that he does all of this and it ends up a disaster, which is my most likely scenario.
What about the third option, that it works out?
It works. That's like the one I give a 1% chance. But look, I think generally speaking, the Democratic Party, you're right, has had a hard time listening to its base and allowing organic support for candidates. It's been very manufactured. And even now, when they say we need to listen to voters, remember they were putting together this strategy for talking to American men, the SAM project. But in that project where they're actually not talking about listening to American men, it's speaking to American men.
Finding a Joe Rogan.
How to translate their message to American men. How to get the American men to understand that they are misguided. It's never like voter to the Democratic Party. It's always Democratic Party to the voter.
Yeah, I think that I don't know if there's like a group of people that just make the decisions we see all the infighting of, several different parts of the Democratic Party. And I'm just wondering, is everybody not seeing the same thing that I'm seeing? It's so easy to point out from an analytical perspective, watching the news every day, watching how voters swayed in the last election season. I think that there is space because it seems like the Democratic Party has a lot to discuss, from people who want to kind of lean into more of the woke policies that they were laying their hat on for the last few years. And we're like, no, we need to double down and create space for underserved communities. And then there's like the AOC, Bernie Sanders part of the party that wants to just blaze forward and say that we are of the working class. All these other policies are really irrelevant. Get back to talking to the people who are blue collar workers in America. And then there's just a whole new wave that is the Mamdani and everyone else that it just wants to come in with new ideas and kind of just redo the whole thing. And I don't think that those things have to be separate and on islands. I think that they can come together, and I think the best type of parties have different ideas that get to the same end goal, and even how government should work in general, like Republican and Democrat, right? The end goal is still the best lives for Americans. But I think within one party, that's a great brainstorming session to figure out how to then capture all those voters that you lost. Like you said, the Latino community moved away. Some of the black male voters moved away. These are all facts that we saw in polling and how the election turned out. These are people that you can get back with real messaging and actually, aside from your ideas, sitting down at tables and getting in the community and figuring out what people really want outside of the broad stroke messaging, like, okay, the economy's not good, but what exactly would they like to see happen?
One of the things you mentioned was, why do the people on the inside not see what I see sitting on the outside? And I think maybe they do see it, but they're addicted to power. And we see this in both political parties, right? This was a problem with Trump's takeover and remaking of the Republican Party was that you had, 12 candidates on a debate stage next to him trying anything possible to stop him. They get through Iowa, and all of a sudden everyone's hanging their hat on Ted Cruz. He's going to be the guy to stop him. You have basically every establishment, pollster, vendor, consultant, whatever it is, lining up behind Ted Cruz to try to stop Trump. And even then, even after his first term after he lost 2020, all of these sort of old figures from the Republican Party started coming up again and saying, he's done, guys. He's never coming back. Don't worry about it. We're going to be back to the neoconservative Republican Party again. And then he again proved them wrong. But I mean, people who are in these party establishment positions have a very vested interest in staying there. Financial interest, power interest, even just influence interest. And so all of these things make it very attractive to keep out these young, promising upstarts because they don't want to lose their grip on the party.
Maybe Democrats need their Trump to kick down the door. That would be insane. Maybe it's Mamdani doing something totally different.
Could be. All right. Has the Trump administration backed off from abolishing FEMA? We'll tell you more on that next.
Is President Trump backing away from abolishing FEMA? As Trump heads to Texas Friday after a catastrophic flooding that left more than 100 people dead and 170 people missing, the Washington Post reports that the White House is backing away from abolishing FEMA.
Meanwhile, President Trump's Environmental Protection Agency head Lee Zeldin launched 2 new resources to deliver total transparency for Americans curious about geoengineering and contrails. Here is Lee Zeldin speaking about the newly launched program. Let's watch.
Concerned Americans have urgent and important questions about geoengineering and contrails. The American public deserves and expects honesty and transparency from their government when seeking answers. But for years, people who asked questions in good faith were dismissed, even vilified by the media and their own government. That era is over. The Trump EPA is committed to total transparency.
Democrat Representative Don Beyer of Northern Virginia blasted the effort, writing on X, quote, "The Trump administration breaks new ground, finding stupid ways to elevate kooks and loons every day. This is genuinely insane."
Here is Fox News host Will Cain speaking with Rainmaker Tech Corporation CEO Augustus Dorico, who came under fire for his cloud seeding mission in South Central Texas just 2 days prior to July 4th flooding.
Are you messing with things that you shouldn't be messing with when it comes to the weather?
I get this question all the time, and I totally think it makes sense to ask it. My intention is to serve God. I think that in Genesis 1:26 through 28, and then throughout the Psalms and the rest of the Bible, God tells us to take dominion over and steward creation, both for our sake, creation's itself, and then to honor him. And so if there are droughts and we have the tools to mitigate the damage done by them for our sake and for nature itself,
I get why this whole thing is controversial, right? People are saying that the Environmental Protection Agency is giving life to potential conspiracy theories and a whirlwind of conversations coming up around these topics. But then, supporters are saying, like, if you ignore people and their complaints and want to know what these things are falling out of the plane, that white smoke that you see, and like what's happening to our environment, people who in this interview that we just saw are they're saying taking the place of God to let weather occur naturally, or by whatever we do in our society. This is like a lot of conversation around it, but I don't think we should have less conversation or dismiss people that have questions.
Exactly. I appreciate that the administration is taking people's concerns seriously and saying, hey, look, this is what you need to know if this is something you're worried about. And the EPA page that we're talking about here on the contrails and geoengineering has been praised by a lot of scientists. Dustin Tingley, a public policy professor at Harvard, described it as rather thoughtful, saying the EPA did a responsible job of taking the concerns that people might genuinely have and providing easy to understand explanations. Columbia University climate economist Gernot Wagner said the web pages published are accurate and said it doesn't seem to get it wrong. So I think it's a better move to tell Americans, look, we hear you, and we're going to show you all of the information that we have about these issues, and you can come up with your own decision based on what you read, as opposed to just calling people conspiracy theorists or stupid or backwards. That's obviously an unhelpful thing that causes people to retrench further into those conspiracies rather than helping to inform them.
And one of the topics that the Rising team was talking about yesterday was in the office was that CNN released a poll that, or they talked about it on their air, that Americans aren't really invested into climate change and that discussion. And there's a number of factors why, right? The economy, so much day-to-day activities that they're more burdened with. But I think it's also the politicizing of anything that has to do with the environment or climate so much that we discuss all the communities that it might affect, but not really get people involved who aren't maybe directly attached to the community or who actually have things like their dinner table and how to feed their kids on their mind. We need to involve people in the conversation in ways that they are comfortable to make them care about these things, because I think overall the world is going to move forward with the climates that's changing around the globe with or without the US. And so the more that we can get Americans on board to have the dialogue and make it an open forum without, condescending people, the better off we'll be to make everybody on board for a better America and a better world for our children.
Yeah, and I think at this point most people understand that the climate is changing, but the questions that remain are how much does human behavior impact that?
Right.
What realistically can we change, and how much will it cost to do that in order to cause an incremental change in the environment? And then they also feel misled by climate catastrophism, which has made a lot of really aggressive predictions about what's going to happen from climate change, which over the years haven't really borne true. And so they feel very misled, like they've been lied to in service of a political agenda. And I think that's caused a lot of mistrust about the conversations we have related to climate change.
Right. And that's why I think in both parties, new faces and voices coming forward to have dialogue about what we all know for sure is that, yes, maybe we're not clear about the implications, but we're clear that it's happening. We'll start the conversation in the right direction, as opposed to, no, your side versus my side. It's the earth. You know what I mean? It's a basic conversation about protecting society. But that does it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss any content. For those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.